Sweetheart, I don't want to alarm you, but
There's almost 12 hours of Treehouse of Horror footage to cover. I've been around long enough to know that a majority of the people watching this video right now don't need to be told for the umpteenth time that The Simpsons is one of the most important, iconic, and dare I say, exceptionally cromulent shows of all time. Nowadays, the show is synonymous with seasonal rot and the ever-classic The Simpsons Will Never Die memes that you see going around the internet at least once a month. And with Disney's relatively recent acquisition of Fox, I think it's safe to say that both the show and the memes aren't going anywhere for a very long time. Thanks a lot, Merkle Mouse.
How long has that boy been treating you like that?
About 24 years.
That being said, at the height of their popularity, and even a bit later, The Simpsons were everywhere.
Eat my shorts.
Okay.
They got their own movie, a popular dance, and were even associated with a whole lot of merch, whether it was Simpsons brand or not. And of course, everyone knows that you can't earn the status of legendary unless you make an appearance at the Ice Capades.
Are you little? Please, it is Ice Capade's policy not to allow strangling in the arena itself.
However, out of everything that The Simpsons has been attached to, I think that none are quite as influential as Treehouse of Horror. Starting in Season 2 and continuing up to the current year, every October, and sometimes November because sports, the family Simpson would put on a menagerie of non-canonical spooky stories, 3 per year to be precise. In the early years, the episodes always started with a warning of sorts, typically from Marge, and wraparounds that connected each segment, whether it be a Halloween party or candy-induced nightmares. These wraparounds were quickly dropped, however, when the show was given less time to broadcast each episode, and the writers decided to focus primarily on the stories, though most of the episodes still included some sort of cold open.
And one thing you'll notice, every year we're always like, we gotta have a big wraparounds and spend hours writing it and then cut it out right before air date. And you'll notice this season, we're like, let's forget it.
The wraparound is the part where Marge says, this is going to be scary and you should get your kids out of the room. And
right, and the warning that we're supposed to
That was
have.
one of the first times that we said, forget it about the stuff, right? Quality, like, let's not bother.
Yeah, then we kept saying it throughout many episodes, yeah.
They called this the Simpsons Halloween Special, followed by whatever number it was in Roman numerals. And while everyone loved the creative original genius that was the title of said specials, it was eventually renamed to Treehouse of Horror by the 13th special. Although technically it was always officially called Treehouse of Horror, since the first Treehouse of Horror revolved around the kids telling scary stories in their treehouse. But for some reason, in the episodes, they refer to them as The Simpsons Halloween Special for the first 12 specials. And if that wasn't confusing enough, seeing as the first Treehouse of Horror episode aired during Season 2, every subsequent special is always off by 1 from the season that it's currently airing in. Yeah, it's kind of a mess in terms of organization, but it's also produced some of the most classic and quotable moments in television history. These specials also inspired some other Halloween anthology stories, like the almost equally great Terror Tales of the Park series from Regular Show, which some were nervous would just be a kid-friendly version of what The Simpsons were offering, until the first special premiered and had a man's skin completely torn off.
I told you I was ripped.
Now, I could go on and on about some of the nuances of Treehouse of Horror, the amazing nicknames that they come up with for the opening and closing credits, and a certain pair of recurring characters that at least cameo in every special. Oh, we'll talk about them eventually. Don't you worry about that. But given that we've now hit the 30th Treehouse of Horror special last year, I figured that a great way to celebrate this would be to go over every segment of every Treehouse of Horror, going over the synopsis, and giving my overall thoughts about each, finishing off by going over my favorites and least favorites towards the end of this video. Okay, I mean, I guess I could talk about something else, if that's what you really want. I could talk about the life-size Simpsons animatronics created by Gemmy Industries. People find animatronics scary now, right?
I said a hip hop, the hippie do the hip hip hop, you don't stop the rocket.
Okay then. Who was that guy? Anyway, there's over 90 segments to cover, and you better believe that I watched them all. One after the other. In a row. Twice. That being said, covering them all would be quite an undertaking for one person, so I was able to get some friends and fellow content creators to help out and cover a segment or two. Some of them will be uploading their segments to their personal channels, and some might post extended cuts of their versions in this video, so if you want to see some of the segments covered on their own, make sure to check out the creators' channels, and their links will be in the description below. A few other things. For this particular video, while there might be some mentions of wraparounds and cold opens by myself and the others, the video is focused primarily on the segments themselves, and they won't factor into my personal feelings of any segments I mentioned towards the end of the video. I'll also only be covering televised episodes, so media such as the Bart Simpson's Treehouse of Horror annual comics and The Simpsons Night of the Living Treehouse video game on Game Boy Color will not be covered in this particular video. And finally, the episodes Halloween of Horror and Thanksgiving of Horror will also not be covered in this video either, as the former, while being a Halloween episode, doesn't fall into the Treehouse of Horror family, and the latter, while following the same format of Treehouse of Horror, is technically a Thanksgiving episode. Alright, I've wasted enough of your time, and we have a lot to cover. Oh boy, do we have a lot to cover. Let's jump straight into the video, starting where it all begins. At the beginning. Which, again, is Season 2. Actually, this still seems confusing. Let me go through this one more time.
Hey everybody, it's Cargo. Today I'm going to be talking about the first segment of the first Treehouse of Horror, Bad Dream House. Coincidentally, this is probably also the first one I ever saw. That's a lot of firsts. Anyway, Bad Dream House is a story told by Bart about the Simpsons living in a haunted dream house, and the hijinks ensue. Pretty simple, but it's executed quite well. You see, this is the third episode of the second season of The Simpsons. Things were rough starting out, so seeing this segment and episode carried out well is kinda surprising. The segment's flow is, well, it's all over the place, but that's okay, because they're mostly focusing on the comedy, not really the story. Speaking of comedy, there is so much randomness in this segment. There's a portal to another dimension, Bert flies to the ceiling, there's a voice telling them to murder each other, and the house kills itself in the end. Great stuff. While it is pretty comedic, it's actually pretty scary too. Multiple lists I've seen have this as one of the scariest segments in all of the Treehouse of Horror episodes. And yeah, I can see that. The first half isn't scary at all, really, but when they're all in bed and that eerie music hits, along with that haunting voice, that's when this segment starts to get pretty dark. Like I said before, they all go to murder each other, and they almost go through with it until Marge tells them to stop. Again, it's kept comedic all the way through, but it is still pretty weird to watch The Simpsons attempt to do something like that. In conclusion, the segment is a good watch for comedy and for horror. It's a good representation of the Treehouse of Horror episodes as a whole, and I highly recommend it.
You didn't tell me it was built on an Indian burial ground! He says he mentioned it 5 or 6 times.
Butt-looking alien!
As the second segment of the entirety of Treehouse of Horror, this segment has quite a legacy to uphold of equally being solid and the weakest of the segments provided. However, Hungry Are the Damned does a spectacular job doing so, even going beyond those limitations that it was supposed to set for itself by arguably being the best offering in the first Treehouse of Horror episode. Don't worry though, because we'll get to that point really soon. This segment is a take on the classic Twilight Zone episode To Serve Man, and it won't be the last time that we see them take inspiration from that show. Again, we'll get there, really soon. The family is barbecuing in their backyard when a UFO abducts them and flies them into space. What follows is the introduction of 2 titular characters that, since their introduction in this segment, have made an appearance in every single Treehouse of Horror episode to date.
Greetings, Earthlings. I am Kang. Kodos and I are taking you to Rigel 4.
Even though in this segment they're more so portrayed as 2 random aliens from their race rather than an inseparable comedic pair, the segment still does a really good job introducing these characters to the world of The Simpsons. The aliens try their best to make sure that the family is well fed and entertained on the way to their home planet, where they'll be welcomed with a big feast, and nobody except Lisa is suspicious. She decides to roam around the spaceship until she finds a cookbook with the title How to Cook Humans. After showing it off to the rest of the family and the aliens get into a back and forth debate about the cookbook's true intentions, with Kang blowing away some space dust, then Lisa blowing away some more space dust, and finally Kang reveals the true title of the book by blowing away the remaining space dust. After finding out that the Simpsons thought that they were going to eat them, the aliens, offended, decide to drop the Simpsons back off at their house, stating that they were only trying to make their lives better before flying off to not be seen again until next Halloween. All in all, this is an extremely memorable segment. Although the segment ends with the horror cliche of the twist is the opposite of the build-up, this segment shines in other areas like the dynamic coloring and lighting during tense moments and, as mentioned before, the characterizations of the aliens. While there is somewhat of a focus on the horror aspect, given that the twist could be guessed from a mile away, the main draw of this segment comes in the form of its humor, which this segment nails.
Anyone from a species that has mastered intergalactic travel, raise your hand.
This segment is a really good introduction to the aliens, and I look forward to seeing Kang and Kodos in future episodes.
There were monsters on that ship, and truly we were them.
Lisa, see what we mean when we say you're too smart for your own good?
The first ever Treehouse of Horror had one portion that, to me, has always stuck out from the rest. Parodies and cartoons aren't uncommon by any means, but the Raven had the ability to combine the humor of The Simpsons with the seeping loneliness of Edgar Allan Poe's The Raven. Immediately, you're hit with James Earl Jones' voice as the narrator for this portion of the episode.
And weary over many a quaint and curious volume of forgotten lore.
Also, while I was doing some research on this video, I found out that James Earl Jones was also in the Garfield and Friends show as Diablo. I'm not sure what to do with this information other than to share it with you, so enjoy! Anyway, The Raven strongly follows the lines of the poem itself, allowing The Simpsons to build off the musicality and flow naturally. James Earl Jones narrates most of The Raven, but Homer Simpson does partake in reading some of the lines as well, whether he's quoting it directly or paraphrasing.
Oh, Lenore.
If you don't know what the legendary poem The Raven is about, well, here's a quick synopsis. The unnamed narrator is sitting by a dying fire, reading forgotten lore as a means to try and help him forget about the death of his beloved Lenore. However, there's a tapping at his door. He goes to answer it, only to see that nothing is there, but he feels that his soul is burning. Whatever, he goes back to his seat, only to hear the tapping once again, but this time it's louder. When he goes to investigate, a raven flies into his chambers. The narrator then asks the raven what his name is, and it responds, Nevermore. The narrator talks to the bird, and all the bird responds with is Nevermore. To the point where the narrator brings up his love, Lenore, that this must be a sign from God that he should forget about Lenore, but is met with the response, Nevermore. After lashing out at the bird, it ends with the raven staying perched upon the bust of Pallas, and the narrator accepting and admitting that he is trapped beneath the raven's shadow and shall be lifted nevermore. The episode follows the rhythm of the poem and does so tremendously, while throwing in some classic Simpson vibes. While hearing James Earl Jones quote The Raven is enveloping within its own right, the true sense of uneasiness begins when Dan Castellaneta also quotes The Raven, delivering some well done lines with the voice of Homer Simpson.
Leave no black plume as a token of the lie thy soul has spoken. Leave my loneliness unbroken.
These moments are both entertaining and unnerving, because throughout the entirety you never really feel like you're out of the horror element. Sure, there's no jump scares nor terrifying animation, but it's the delivery of the lines that harbor the most impact. Also making Bart the Raven is icing on the cake.
Nevermore.
There are some comedic moments to try and take you out of the dread that is, well, the Raven, such as Lenore being Marge Simpson with the hair needing one more painting, or Homer screaming, "Why, you little," at the Raven, or even Bart stopping the story to criticize that nothing being at the door is boring. This episode always left me with a feeling of uneasiness as a kid, and ultimately pushed me forward into looking deeper into Edgar Allan Poe's writing. The way The Simpsons handled this poem is truly something special, and while that may be my nostalgia talking, I'm sure there's many others that vividly remember how creepy this portion was back in the day.
monkey! Hello, it's ShadeX, and it's time to come clean. I am a Simpsons fan. Treehouse of Horror is one of the most creative things to ever come out of this show. These specials are a yearly tradition, and while they are non-canon, I still love them. So when I heard Dan the Man was doing a video on every Treehouse of Horror segment ever, I just had to be a part of it. I remember seeing a lot of Treehouse of Horror segments. One of them that sticks out for me the most is the Monkey's Paw from Treehouse of Horror II. This is a really good segment, and while it isn't necessarily scary, it is still an enjoyable one. The segment begins with the Simpsons family vacationing in Morocco. Homer buys a monkey's paw from a merchant, despite being warned by him not to buy it. Homer shows it to Marge, and then this funny gag happens.
That little shop right over there. On your way, it was over there.
Be sorry.
The Simpsons are on their way home, but then Homer is at gunpoint by airport security. Homer reveals he is smuggling souvenirs and is told to pay a fine of $2 American. I find this scene very funny. Simpsons then go home and are indecisive on who should get the first wish. Bart and Lisa fight. Bart wants X-ray specs at work, and Lisa wants world peace. Maggie then gets a hold of the monkey's paw and makes the first wish. She makes her wish, and a luxury car shows up. Homer is excited, hoping to get the car, but then it's revealed she wished for a new pacifier. Then the car drives away. Bart then makes a wish that he wants his family to be rich and famous. The Simpsons then become the richest people in Springfield. However, the town quickly grows tired of them. I really like the meta jokes, like the existence of Simpsons music and merch related to the family existing in the show's world. But the best gag has got to be the billboard of Bart that says, "Get a mammogram, man." After that wish goes wrong, Lisa wishes for world peace. Everyone in the world destroys their weapons. Then everyone in America joins hands and forms a peace symbol. King and Kodos then go to Earth to take over Springfield and the rest of the world. The people of Springfield are now slaves to the aliens. The monkey's paw has one wish left, and Homer wishes for a turkey sandwich, hoping nothing will go wrong. He eats the sandwich, hoping it'll be good, but he discovers the turkey is a bit dry, to his sadness. Homer is about to throw away the monkey's paw, but then Ned Flanders asks him about it. He gives it to Ned, hoping that'll give him bad luck. Ned then wishes for the aliens to go away, and then Moe ends up chasing Kang and Kodos with a wooden plank with a nail in it. The two aliens then go back to space. Ned then decides he wants to spruce up the home and makes another wish. Homer then looks jealously at his neighbor's castle and says that he wishes he had a monkey's paw. Overall, the monkey's paw is a fun Treehouse of Horror segment. While not being scary, it is still a great fantasy story. The monkey's paw is very memorable and stands out to me as one of the most classic Treehouse of Horror segments.
Just a weasel! Not unlike the last entry I covered, the Bart Zone is a take on yet another Twilight Zone episode. This one being It's a Good Life. In this segment, Bart has supernatural powers where he can basically do whatever he wants to those around him with just a simple thought, and he can read people's minds. Because of this, everyone in Springfield has to force themselves to be happy, because they don't want to be on Bart's bad side. This all comes together when Homer refuses to change the channel from a football game, and Bart teleports him there in place of the ball. After failing to sneak up on Bart to attack him, Homer is turned into a jack-o'-lantern. And Marge forces Bart and Homer to see Dr. Marvin Monroe for some family therapy. After doing some father-son activities per the suggestion of the not-so-good doctor, Bart and Homer bond more, and Bart even turns Homer back to normal. Homer kisses Bart, and then Bart wakes up screaming. Now remember when I said that the middle segments usually tend to be the weakest of the triad? Well, that's definitely the case here. Not to give too much criticism to this segment, there is still an eerie vibe to it, and it does have its moments of comedy here and there. However, the strongest aspect of Bart's character is that nearly every other character in the show is a foil to his rebellious attitude. To have nearly everyone just go along with him, while making sense in terms of the plot, isn't very entertaining or enjoyable to watch in my opinion. And while this segment starts out okay, I feel like it kind of flatlines in the last half, where it changes from a story of a child who can run rampant with these powers to a sort of campy message.
It's alive! It's alive!
Homer gets fired randomly from his job at the power plant while Mr. Burns and Smithers work on finishing up their robot worker, which will make the rest of their workers obsolete. All they need to complete the worker is a brain, so they hit up the graveyard where they find a slumbering Homer, who just so happens to have gotten a job as a gravekeeper after being fired from the plant. They kidnap Homer and take out his brain and put it inside the robot worker.
It's moving! It's alive!
In case I didn't make it clear at this point, I think it's pretty obvious to see what this segment is parodying. The experiment goes wrong, however, when it turns out the robot is acting just like Homer, which means he won't be very good at his job. It's almost like a human's personality and character traits are tied to their brain. Nah, that can't be right. After some convincing from Smithers, Burns decides to put the brain back in Homer's body and is about to return him to his family when the robot falls on top of Burns, crushing every vital organ in his body. In his dying breath, he tells Smithers to sew his head onto Homer's body, and Homer wakes up from the nightmare before Smithers is able to do anything. Or does he? This is definitely a memorable segment not only for how gruesome it was at the time, but oddly enough, the dialogue and bits that played out, especially between Burns and Smithers.
Bed corpse! Bed corpse! Stop scaring Smithers! Satisfied?
Thank you, sir.
This segment is easily the highlight of the episode for me.
Hello everyone, my name is D'Angelo Edwards, host of Hats Off, an official Halloween tax collector. But rather than bleeding you dry for liberal use of spandex, instead today, I have been asked by Dan to participate in this Halloween spooktacular. My lawyers say I can't use that phrase, but I'm doing what I want. I didn't start consuming The Simpsons until later in my life, but when I did, the Treehouse of Horror specials were always my favorite part. Watching the characters run around in these silly, spooky scenarios was almost always a treat. Almost. But for now, I'm going to be looking at a segment from one of the best ones. Clown Without Pity from Treehouse 3. First of all, I want to say,